The topic of this session is tech for good. And by way of a quick intro, I want to talk about, I want to start by quoting Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, who famously said, we wanted flying cars and we got 140 characters. Now we have flying cars, but we're still not solving the world's biggest problems, including poverty, unemployment, and the refugee issues. I'd like to, I think it's funny that a lot of the young entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley like to say that they're changing the world. But in fact, as someone once pointed out, they are mainly replacing the services that their mothers used to provide for them, like inventing someone to give them rides, bring them food, clean their clothes. And today, we've got two entrepreneurs who really are changing the world. And so with no more further ado, I'd like to now turn to our panelists, Munzer and Leila, to talk about exactly how they are changing the world. So Leila, I know you are in a bit of a hurry, so I'm gonna start with you, if that's okay, and have you introduce SAMASOURCE.
Can you hear me? There we go. Hi, I run two companies. One is called SAMASOURCE. We're unusual because we're a nonprofit organization, although we are intentionally nonprofit in Silicon Valley. And despite our structure, we're actually profitable off of earned revenue. So we're like an NGO structure, but running a social business inside the company. And we're now one of the premier providers of training data services to large technology companies. So we employ now 2,000 people. We're the biggest data services company in East Africa. They all come from marginalized backgrounds, and they provide high quality image, video, text, and audio file annotation for AI purposes. So our tags are used in some of the most cutting-edge applications, from self-driving cars at some of the biggest auto companies to biotech and many other industries. And we have a venture as well called Sama School within the Sama universe that does training in digital freelancing and the gig economy for low-income workers in the US. So this model is, I believe, one of the ways that we solve for technology-driven unemployment is growth in local services, but paying living wages to those workers. And we have a model for how to do that. And my second company, LXMI, is the first fair trade skincare brand sold nationwide at Sephora in the US. So it sounds funny to be running a tech business and an ethical skincare company, but they're both based on the principle of giving work. And LXMI just launched in Europe yesterday with our first big European retailer. So I'm really excited about the promise of both of these companies to scale further.
Thanks. So I'm going to come back to you with a number of questions, but I'd like to have Munzer introduce himself and explain what BUREAUCRAZY does.
So thank you very much for having us. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the application. So it will be a web application that will help the refugees and the newcomers navigate through the bureaucratic system easily through multiple features we're going to present in our application. So explaining a little bit how the application works, I'm going to talk a little bit about the features. One is translation. So we will translate the forms the user of the application or the newcomer need to fill out into his language. For example, we have now English and Arabic, and then he can read it and fill it out in his language. Afterwards, he can submit it through our application and then have the form back into German, and then he can submit it in the office. And the second feature that I'm going to present today is guidance. So it's not just translation. It's not just get informations. No, it's going to be how to get the forms right, where to submit them, and when should I submit, and it's also always recorded according to your personal status. So for example, I'm a refugee, what should I do now? I want to register there, what kind of papers do I need, and so on. That kind of application, I think, I believe that it will solve a lot of problems according to things that newcomers, I mean, someone who just came to new country, doesn't know anything, doesn't speak the language, and I believe that through these features, through our application, it will like help him a lot in this kind of things, so so he can be easily integrated into society and easily having his forms and knowledge done.
I just want to note that you know very well the problem. So Munzer and his two are refugees from Syria. And so you confronted this problem yourself and are now trying to solve it. And I think the thing that really bridges what both of you do is you're using technology to give dignity to people. And so I'd like to jump back now to Leila and talk about this whole notion of human in the loop and why humans are needed to train the AI, and how easy is it to take people from disadvantaged circumstances and train them to do these jobs?
Well, it's definitely not easy. If it were easy, I think more people would be doing it. And it can be very challenging. We work with people who come from $2 a day backgrounds. And if you've ever spent time in a very low income country, East Africa is an example. There's incredible human talent. In many of these regions, people finish secondary school, but they don't have access to many of the resources that we might take for granted in wealthier countries, like growing up with a computer at home or a computing device in your hand. And so just teaching people the basics of how to navigate a computer can take a little while, but we've seen that once somebody grasps those basics, they're very quick to learn things like image annotation. This is not rocket science. And interestingly, the head of AI at Tesla, who's arguably one of the world's leading experts on this field, has said that human labeling is going to be as important as programming, if not more, in the future. Human labelers are the next generation of programmers. And that is quite a thing to say. So all of the people who are so concerned about automation, I think there's a bit of arrogance in the tech world. We think that these machines that we've built are going to dominate nature and human intelligence, but we barely understand how the brain works today. We barely understand how things like antidepressants actually function in the brain. And in order to develop machine learning, you have to have an understanding of how that equivalent system would work in the brain. So I think we're quite far from the singularity, quite far from the moment where machine intelligence will eclipse human intelligence. And in the interim, there are a lot of opportunities for humans to advance this kind of automation. And so we believe that there's really a very tight feedback loop. What we do in providing training data eventually gets pushed out, right, in the form of, say, a software release around self-driving cars. And then that generates additional real-world data that either confirms or denies the validity of our tagging. So there's a feedback loop in which the humans and the machines are working together. And the most cutting-edge applications of AI really involve that feedback loop, right?
So I think there's a couple of really interesting things there. One is that so much of the discussion about AI has been about fears of the loss of white-collar jobs in the developed world, without, mentioning that actually bringing digital work to places like Africa will be part of the development of AI and could be very transformative to, people on the ground there. And the second thing that I wanted you to highlight is the fact that You have been able to prove the quality of the work, and that this information is then bought by big corporations like Walmart and so forth, and it helps them while at the same time helping the people on the ground in Africa.
Yeah, it's interesting. People have a tendency to be a little bit paternalistic about social impact endeavors. I don't know if any of you in the audience run social impact firms, but you're probably familiar with this. If you do, people think, oh, that's so cute. You run a nonprofit in Africa. Is that your full-time job? People have asked me that. Meanwhile, we've literally built a very large enterprise in a quite a difficult environment, doing something that's really non-traditional. So it can be really tough. But I think the rewards are huge, and what we found is that we face the same challenges as any major enterprise does in scaling up. So our vision is to be the largest technology employer in sub-Saharan Africa, and as you see here, there's tremendous growth around the continent in tech, and we still have, I think, very traditional views about the human capabilities and talent pool, particularly in that region, and I think largely driven by the aid and the charity messaging that so many of us have heard.
So let me now turn to you, Munzer, and you're just getting started. You're going to launch your application in Germany in about 2 months' time, but I know you have big dreams, and certainly the refugee problem exists in many countries around the world, and refugees struggle because they can't understand or navigate the bureaucracy. They have to learn the language and so forth. So how do you plan to try and scale this, and what sort of help do you need?
So first, let me say that we're launching the beta version in 2 months, not like the full version. So the first version will be in Germany, in Berlin. What we're trying to tackle there is the problems of refugees and newcomers. Like Berlin have a lot of newcomers coming every day, have a lot of refugees there. They don't know what to do with their papers. I still not know what to do with my papers. It's not a language issue. Like, even if you know how to speak the language, like the language of the office is high standard, even for people who's trying to help us. As someone who goes to the office with us and start to talk with the people there, with the officer, and they start, like, it's a little bit hard to understand even for them. Like, it's not a language issue. So what we're trying to do in our application is not just to translate the forms, like literally, just like Google Translate. We're trying to translate into a symbol language. We will even have the application in German, so in symbol German. So everyone can use it. And in case of scalability, of course, I believe that what we're building is not just an application that could be used in one country. Whenever you add new language, whenever you add new data to it, you can scale it wherever you want. Like, for example, here in France, we've been already talking to NGOs here in France, and they showed a lot of interest to make the application here, even in France, to add the French language, the French, and to add new processes to the application so the people here and the newcomers, the refugees, could even use it. So we're not just building an application, we're building a whole organization that will help the newcomers and the refugees empower themselves, to bend more on themselves, to help them go out, not just to NGOs so they can ask for help, no, but go out and meet new people. Like, knowing what to do is one of the biggest issue that someone like me, I had when I first arrived. I'm gonna just say that, like a small number, that I had to go to the offices more than 25 times just in the first year. As like, you can imagine that kind of things, it's really hard for us to navigate through it. We ask for help, but then no one is an expert. Like, even if you go to an NGO, for a person who has like a child or who has something else, it has to be personalized somehow. And that's what we're trying to do in our application. So we're trying to show relevant information to the user. So for example, I'm Syrian, I just arrived, I want to study, for example. And then the application will guide him through a process of like how to register at the university, how to register as Ausbildung, and so on. So that kind of things, NGOs is trying their best. I really appreciate it. But then personalizing is missing there. And that kind of things we're trying to tackle through our application.
And I might add, you're not using artificial intelligence. You're coding to do this, which is hard work. And you and your founders are doing this as volunteers after your day job, and you don't have any funding as yet. So anybody here who wants to help, connect them to some funding or help them with funding. I know that would be appreciated. Also, perhaps you could use some help with putting the content together from different countries, and maybe even with the coding. So if anybody here is interested in knowing more or helping, please see Munzer after the session. And let me turn back to you now, Leila. Let's talk a little bit about the beauty products thing that you've just launched here. So tell us a little, I mean, I think this is based on some product from, that women are helping to, so tell us a little bit about how it's developed, and then let us know what people here in the room can do to help support that and SAMASOURCE.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in models that can create living wage work for people who are traditionally excluded and marginalized. And one of the things that Sub-Saharan Africa has in abundance is wild botanicals. In many cases, these botanicals are grown in regions that are conservation areas and are under severe threat due to deforestation. And the main driver of a lot of the deforestation around the world is actually people needing an income and selling their land to the nearest cattle farmer or selling their land to a mining company. And so if we can provide an alternative to them to make more money keeping these wild assets alive than killing them, which has been done very well in gorilla conservation by remarkable Rwanda over here, and also by the government of Uganda. If you can show people that wild assets like gorillas are worth more money if they're still living, then there's an incentive on the part of the local population to keep them going. So that was part of the drive, not just living wage work, to set up LXMI. And we came across a really incredible wild ingredient called nilotica. It feels like a high-tech lab created it, but it's actually just a single organic ingredient that comes from northern Uganda, which is a region that most of us know because of a civil war that was waged there over 20 years, where child soldiers were abducted. And so the idea that these war widows can earn a living wage by harvesting an ingredient that not only is incredible for the skin, but also incredible for the world and for natural resource protection, to me was really compelling. And I thought, every time I pass through duty free and I see a fancy, no offense to LVMH, but a fancy luxury skin cream that contains petroleum-based derivatives or endocrine disrupting chemicals or emulsifiers, I think to myself, why am I spending 150 euros on something that's not only not good for me, but not good for the world, when there are all of these incredible products. So I'm on such a mission to promote more fair trade and organic practices in the supply chain. But I also think there's a missing piece, which is many of these brands are not seen as luxurious. They're not seen as high-end, right? They're not often making it on the pages of the biggest fashion magazines. And so we want to change that. It already is changing. Here in France, there's a brand called Veja that makes sustainable sneakers that is now like a cult favorite among fashionistas. So we think there's room to do the same thing in beauty. And technology also plays a role in that. It's now easy for us to tell the stories of the people who actually make the raw ingredients. And when we launched, we put stickers on every product that had a harvest number. And if you type that number into our website, you could actually see a video of one of the women who harvested the nuts that were in your jar of skin cream. So this, radical decrease in the cost of transparency is, I think, a really big thing for companies like mine, which are doing consumer goods and physical products. And it's already happening in fashion. It's just slower to enter the beauty and cosmetic space.
So what can people here in the room do to help support what you're doing?
You guys can go on to LXMI.com, LXMI.com, and purchase our products. And we're also now on sale as of yesterday in Europe with free shipping anywhere in Europe with Cult Beauty, C-U-L-T, Beauty. And if you don't want to buy our products, no problem, just spread the word, or even just take a look and give us feedback.
Great. And I know you have to run off to catch a plane. So with that, I'm going to ask for you to give a really nice round of applause for two great entrepreneurs.